All right, folks, so this is a secondary source reading an essay by Peiss. The name of the essay is Charity Girls and City Pleasures. And this essay is about how immigrant teenagers at the turn of the century, early 1900s, in places like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, so on and so forth, basically created teenage culture. All right. Remember, prior to these teenagers, all socialization done by people your age was chaperoned. It was always done in the presence of parents or adults, right? They were the first teenagers in the history of this country, really, that would go out and they would socialize with the opposite sex, the opposite gender, without being chaperoned. All right. And it really, really drove progressives crazy. They thought that was a recipe for inappropriate behavior. All right. So what many progressives would do is they would hire investigators, just like they would hire investigators to go into pubs to make sure they weren't serving unescorted women or interracial crowds. They would hire investigators, that older folks that appeared young, that could pass as a teenager, to go into these amusement parks like Coney Island, which you see pictured here, all right, or dance halls like Hammerstein Ballroom or Roseland Ballroom, and would report about what they saw, and write these reports and give them to these progressive reformers. All right. Again, in New York City, they were called the Committee of 14, Committee of 15, depending on how many members they had. Um, but that's kind of what they would do. All right. So when you read this, you need to be aware of a couple of things. All right. The phrase charity girls, all right, um, is a phrase that was used back then to refer to a girl of looser morals. We would use different phrases today. All right. Now, um, in the early 20th century and still today, but more so back then, males were paid more than women. Today it's 80 cents of the dollar. Back then it was even more of a disparity. All right. On top of that, um, teenage family members were expected to hand over what was called their pay envelope, what we would call a paycheck, to their parents at the end of the week. All right. And they would get a small portion of it, if anything. All right. Sometimes, as you saw in the Heaven Will Protect video, they would skip lunch, so they would have more money to go out. But this was the beginning of the world of inexpensive amusements, cheap amusements, like movie theaters and amusement parks, things that didn't exist before the early 20th century. All right. Now, since male teenage workers got paid significantly more than female teenage workers, all right, the boys had enough money to go out, the girls did not. So this also began the practice of treating, where the boy would treat the girl to a night out. All right. Now, as you may know, that comes with certain expectations, at least in the mind of the boy. Some type of reciprocal behavior by the girl. All right. So females were always towing the line between getting a boy to treat them and dealing with those expectations. All right. A lot of times, female teenagers would go out in groups just to protect themselves from boys' advances. All right. So when you read this, remember you were reading this as a scholar, as a historian. Um, so we're adults here. And again, please don't be too hard on the girls. They were just trying to navigate in a world where they were paid very little, and they wanted to experience this brand new world of entertainment. All right. Also, please keep in mind that the sources used for this essay were the reports written for these progressive reformers. So remember a couple of things. Number one, things that were said by adults with who would see differently than you would. Imagine if um, the vice principals were out with you on a night out, what they would see versus what you would see, or your parents. All right. They may see dangerous, inappropriate behavior. You may not. So remember, it's being viewed through an adult Protestant middle class lens. All right. Um, so please keep that in mind. Also, please keep in mind that historians pretty much think that these investigators very often would sensationalize what they would witness. because they knew on which side the bread was buttered. If they came back and issued a boring report that nothing happened, they wouldn't get hired again. All right, there'd be no need to further investigate these dance halls. So they were embellished most likely. All right, and the third thing to remember is a lot of times there would be sort of this entrapment where the investigators were not just observers, if you know what I mean. All right, and they would entrap these teenagers into this behavior they would later report on. All right. So again, please don't be too hard on these girls. You should be understanding, and try to kind of view this through their lens, because that's the lens you currently have right now. All right. So again, it's called Charity Girls and City Pleasures.